Hey, thanks for dropping by to the Planners on Purpose podcast, created by Naomi Tucker, CMP. Now, this space is for the event planners to encourage and empower you so that you can fully live your life on purpose. So before we dig in, please take a moment to subscribe so you get future shows. Now, here she comes, your host, Naomi.
Hi everyone, this is Naomi Tucker. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Planners on Purpose podcast. Today I'm looking forward and sharing with you an interview that I had with Leah Weinberg, and I know you're going to enjoy this one. Leah is discussing the emotional side of a planner's job. As an event professional, we get all the feelings. The feeling of excitement before execution, the feelings of completion and pride when an event is over, but we get other feelings too, like the feeling of anxiety, of overwhelm, and possibly fear or shame. So let's talk about it. But before we do, let me tell you a bit about my guest, Leah Weinberg. Leah is the co-founder of Udeberg LLP and the co-owner of a contract template shop called Legally Set. She's an attorney, a recovering wedding planner, and the author of The Wedding Rollercoaster. Her work and insights have been published online and in print with Vogue, The New York Times, People, CNN, CNBC, Bravo, Martha Stewart, and The Knot, among others. Leah will tell you a bit more about her as we get into the interview, but again, I hope you enjoy this discussion, and I'll see you on the other side. Well, today I get to sit down with Leah Weinberg, owner and creator of ColourPop Events. Leah's going to be sharing a bit with us about the emotional side of an event planner's job, which can be a lot of emotions wrapped up into what we do. So I'm excited to have her on the podcast. Leah, thank you for being here and welcome to the Planners on Purpose podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm excited about our conversation. And before we jump into the good stuff, I just wanted to set a little bit of foundation for our listeners. You're a wedding planner, a writer, and an attorney, which is such an interesting combination. So I would love if you would just tell us a bit more about you and just how this like blend of talent came to be.
Absolutely. So I've been in business for 8.5 years, been the owner of ColourPop Events. Prior to that, I was a commercial real estate attorney. So I practiced law for about a total of 10 years. I started ColourPop while still working as an attorney and kind of slowly transitioned out of that. So I don't actively practice law anymore, but the skills have absolutely come in very handy with my clients in terms of like reviewing contracts for postponements and cancellations and like negotiating new terms for, policies and all that kind of stuff. So still relevant, but definitely not an active part of my day to day.
Nice. So I know you mentioned that you have that attention to detail, right? An attorney has such a big attention to detail. I'm sure that came through with your planning as well.
Absolutely. And also too, as attorneys, we are trained to kind of think of the worst case scenario and make sure that whatever type of contract it is we're drafting accounts for the worst case scenario. So it really helps in wedding planning because it allows me to sort of think of all these different things that could happen on a wedding day, depending on the different context of the wedding and the situation. So, and prepare for it. So that has been particularly helpful.
I bet. I mean, our industry is just so detail oriented and we're making plans on top of plans to make sure that everything is going forward without a hitch. So
100%. Yeah. You have to be ready for anything. And I find that like when you can kind of think through some of the big stuff that could go wrong, when something smaller happens, it's just much easier to deal with because you've kind of planned for the absolute worst. And then something small is kind of like a welcome thing if it has to happen.
Absolutely. So tell me, how did ColourPop, I guess, get through the pandemic? How did that really help change your business, or did it?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. I mean, it was hard, just like
Mhm.
everybody else. It was really hard, especially in New York, because we had some of the
Yes.
strictest requirements or strictest lockdown in terms of absolutely no events taking place.
Mhm.
Nothing could happen for several months. And then it became kind of towards the end of 2020, you could do like 25 people indoors and 50 people outdoors. But obviously most of my clients are doing 100 people plus weddings. That couldn't happen until 2021. So I took the time. I had already started writing my book, which I know we're going to talk a little bit more about, but started writing my book prior to 2020, but with kind of like the time and space and everything that having no weddings gave me, I was able to get that finished and get it published in early 2021. And then I got it out, and basically things opened back up in New York after that. And it was just kind of like nonstop go for the rest of 2021.
Let's get into your book. I know you just mentioned it. Let's talk about that process.
Yeah.
How long had you been thinking about writing a book, and how was that journey?
Yeah, I've actually writing a book has always been something that has been on my to-do list. I think it was just a matter of figuring out what my first book, what the topic was going to be, because I had a lot of different ideas. And then following a conversation I had with one of my clients in 2017 about an argument she was having with her dad, which the whole story is in the book. But this conversation I had with her kind of made me think about people's behavior and how things get really strange when people are planning weddings. And I wanted to learn about the psychology of it. And so I got psychology books. I interviewed different experts, got commentary from some real couples, and wrote a book. It's called The Wedding Rollercoaster, Keeping Your Relationships Intact Through the Ups and Downs. And it's written for engaged couples. But it's also a really helpful resource for vendors, because it gives them a lot of insight into what their couples are going through. And then also just has a lot of tips kind of on how to be a good human in general, how to be a good communicator, how to have difficult conversations, how to be self-aware, just kind of all of that stuff about like how we all relate to other people.
Oh, that had been just an amazing journey to go on, and to finally get it published. What would you think would be your most difficult, I guess, experience with getting it out there?
Yeah, so I self-publish it. I would say the actual like nuts and bolts of taking your written words and like getting it into book form, because I had no idea what I was doing. I worked with a book coach who was able to, guide me on it, but there's like different types of editing that the book needs to go through. You've got to have somebody who can do like the cover layout, but it has to be like specific specs for printing. The layout process of the whole book itself, was just very kind of strange, because you kind of just get like a giant PDF and you go through it and you look for things that look off, and whether you need to like move things to a different page, and if graphics are off the page. So yeah, it was really that like the logistics of getting the book out that I was not prepared for. The writing part was, I like to write. I've been a writer for a really long time. So that part came pretty easy to me once I was able to sit down and write it. But it was the actual like, how do we make this into like a tangible object was the challenging part.
Yeah. And that's just very interesting. And I always hear that the editing process can be a little, something that you're not expecting too, when it comes to writing a book. And it sounds like you went through that as well.
What was interesting was what was hard for me in terms of the writing process was actually how to organize the book. Like I had all the different sections, I had all the chapters, but I think I went through 3 different iterations of like how to organize it. And ultimately kind of landed on sort of chronological. So we started from the beginning, like you get engaged, what happens, and then talking about money, and then finding vendors, and then like wedding party, and then guests and all that stuff. But it was, I was trying to, the whole organizational process was really interesting to try to just put it all together.
I bet. So if you could give us like the one most insightful thing that you learned as when you're putting things together and going through all of that psychological research, what would be, I guess, your one thing that you would share with everyone?
Oh, wow. It's hard to narrow it down, but
I know to one thing.
But I think one of the biggest lessons is that what something seems to be about on the surface is probably not what it's actually about. Like there's different, whether it's an argument, whether it's somebody expressing like a want or a need, there's probably a lot more going on beneath the surface that gives you the true sort of motivation behind somebody's behavior.
Awesome. So it's called Wedding Rollercoaster?
Yes, the Wedding Rollercoaster.
The Wedding Rollercoaster. Perfect. So anyone that's interested, go ahead and pick that up. And I'm sure there's lots of tips in there for planning weddings for wedding planners and those couples, and then also vendors alike.
Absolutely.
So perfect. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So speaking of wedding roller coasters, the last 2 years have been like difficult, and it's probably been more of an emotional roller coaster for planners, right? So I guess we were planning in a pretty much a certain environment, and then now there's so many different things happening. You have new roles, you have people anxious about what's next for them. I guess, what advice do you have for planners that are looking to find the emotional side of their job? If they're finding it especially challenging to walk through, what advice would you have for them?
I think it's about us figuring out what our clients' common pain points are and trying to cut it off at the pass before it starts getting bad. So like we should be proactive about bringing these things up and not kind of waiting for them to happen and then dealing with the emotional clients in those situations.
When you're thinking about like a new client, I guess there has to be some certain skills, right, that one can pick up in order to determine, well, for this client, this is what's important to them. So how would you, I guess, what are some identifiers for planners when they're kind of working with a client to help them identify what's important so they can minimize that roller coaster?
Yeah. I mean, it starts from that very first call, just paying attention to what people are saying, honestly, to what people are not saying, and kind of reading between the lines. It just takes us to just be like keenly aware and making sure we're paying attention, and then asking questions about, what are they finding most difficult about the wedding planning process? And who knows what kind of, the answer that you get is going to be very telling, because it might be something like, we're having just a lot of stress about putting a budget together, or it could be something like, I've got, my maid of honor is just completely having a moment and our friendship is kind of falling apart. And so it's about asking those questions and starting the conversations. And part of that too is about building trust and building a relationship. So they need to feel comfortable talking to you about those things, because that information is critical for us to do our jobs. So we have to kind of foster this environment where they feel comfortable divulging these sometimes sensitive things.
Yeah. And very personal, right?
And very personal, but like, we have to know what's going on, because otherwise, like we said from the beginning, we'll be caught off guard and, not be able to prepare for things.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that planners have, let's say, specific types of emotional styles too? And how does that work when it comes to balancing it with your client?
Yeah, it's funny. I would have thought that most wedding planners tend to just be by default, like very empathetic and compassionate and like people who bond and connect. But recently in a Facebook group that's of wedding planners across the country, I saw somebody post in there, and she said, for anybody in this group who's not a natural like empath, who doesn't like the emotional side of like working with clients, she's like, please give me your tips on what to do, because I keep getting these I have these clients that are either going through something emotionally or turn to me for kind of this like emotional support and advice. And she's like, that is just that's not my jam whatsoever. And so it's true, like wedding planners, I think like across a spectrum There's a lot of different emotional styles. We all relate to our clients differently. I know some people who like to stay arm's length with their clients, and it's just a more professional and like transactional thing. For me, I like to build relationships with a lot of my clients. Some of my closest friends today are like past clients who we've stayed in touch and just built friendships. So everybody's really different, and it's about kind of owning whatever your emotional style is. So like, for example, this woman who's not great at connecting with people or wanting to deal with the emotional stuff, like her branding and her messaging and her voice should kind of communicate that. Honestly, she can say something like, hey, I'm not going to be your best friend, but I'm going to execute the crap out of your wedding and it's going to be great. Exactly. And I'll have your back and it'll all be taken care of, but like, don't come cry on my shoulder kind of thing. So we all need to be self-aware and kind of understand what our own style and tendency is, and then just make that part of who we are. I mean, I think my branding definitely speaks to like building those relationships and forming connections with my clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And playing to what those strengths are, right? And having that be more of what you lead with versus what that weakness would be.
Absolutely.
So that's really good, because I find that even just, with me and kind of being the manager of some of people, it's really hard especially when you have to do like a change of guard or change of planner on a particular client, and they're two totally different people. The way they handle emotions are totally different ways of doing it. And sometimes it's really tough to really help coach, let's say, that planner to help with that client. So it's really important for you to be self-aware. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah. And I think it also goes to one of the lessons that it took me a while to learn, in terms of like, when you're first starting out, it's natural, like to take a look at what other people are doing and maybe be jealous and compare yourself and think, oh, they're so busy, or, oh, they're working like at the venues that I want to work with. But ultimately, we all connect with our clients in a different way. And so if somebody's hiring me, the other person's not going to be a good fit, and vice versa. And so depending on how we build relationships and how we connect with people, like that's part of what makes us us and is what sells. So we kind of also have to just keep that in mind, that everybody really truly is different and meant to be working with different people.
Yeah, that's very true. Because there are some, let's say, high profile, very, I guess, hands-on programs that it takes a special type of person. And so even if you, let's say, have a planner emotionally might not be strong enough that you might feel for that position, how would you help them with taking on, let's say, a client like that? That's a question that I would have.
Part of it has to do with kind of practice, honestly. Sometimes, like if you come to the conclusion that your clients just consistently are requiring something from you that you aren't totally comfortable with, then I think it's about kind of building up that muscle memory a little bit, and like practicing in other situations, whether it's like, if you have a friend that had a bad day, like practice figuring out how to have like that conversation with them and be there for them, so that you can ultimately like be there for your clients. So it's about practice. And then it's about, again, ultimately just making sure that you're working with the right people that are going to be a fit for you, but also, and to, potentially setting boundaries. There's awkward conversations that might have to be had, but if your clients come to you with something that you are just like, this is not part of my job. This is not in my wheelhouse. I don't think I'm the appropriate person to handle this. Like, tell that to your clients and kind of let them know, give them a heads up about like what they can expect from your relationship at the beginning. So hopefully it can kind of save those uncomfortable situations later on.
Yeah, no, I really resonate with that, especially the practice. And I think that's important for a lot of people to hear, because sometimes, let's say, you might have a planner that really, really wants to be on this type of event, right? But you can see that there has to be some practice that might position them for that
Yes.
particular event. So I think that's really helpful for people that are managing others,
Yeah.
to put them in a position where they're going to thrive and do really well, but maybe practicing a little bit first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So how much do clear priorities matter with planning events, as it relates to the emotive piece of what we're talking about right now?
Yeah. I mean, we have to just kind of have a clear picture. We have to have a clear picture of what our role is, what we want our role to be, what, again, kept getting those details from clients so that we kind of know what is coming and what to expect. Like, being prepared is what's really going to help us with the emotional side of wedding planning. And so kind of understanding, like, again, going what we said before, what clients do we want to be working with and prioritizing working with those types of people? Or if it's, prioritizing practice, getting the practice in so we can kind of strengthen ourselves in those certain areas. It's definitely about the preparation. I find that the more proactive we can be and just in general as planners, the better off we are, because we're not dealing with like just being reactive. We're taking care of it on the front end so that we're not left with the waterfall of emotions and stress and anxiety on the back end.
Yeah. And you would think, because, everyone's planners and they might be organized. Sometimes that is a struggle. With certain planners, being prepared and having things in a systematic way so that they kind of alleviate themselves of those other challenges that might come up. So that's definitely a piece to pay attention to.
Yeah. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemy, honestly, in terms of like not having good systems and processes. And again, like even knowing your strengths in that area. Are you good at organization? Are you not? If you're not great, maybe hire somebody to be part of your team, whether it's like a virtual assistant or an associate planner or something, like who can be responsible for your creating your timeline so that they're thinking of all the little things that need to go in that in case that's not one of your strengths. So there's like strengths in business and there's strengths emotionally. My husband said something once that was really kind of was profound, which is not many people start a business to run a business. They start the business because they love whatever product they provide or whatever service they provide. And so it's like, we like planning weddings, but maybe we're really bad about accounting and taxes and marketing and social media and all those, like the systems and processes kind of thing. Like we can do great at planning and executing a wedding, but our business is just sort of in shambles behind the scenes. So,
So do you have systems or maybe even organizational practices that you can offer to our listeners or advocate for while planning events and weddings?
Yeah. I mean, I actually have a whole like webinar that I do on
there
systems and processes. And like the highlights are, making sure that you've got your money straight. So having a firm grasp on your expenses, your personal expenses, your business expenses, the income, how much you need, like keeping all of that together. You have to understand money and cash flow and all that stuff. That's super important. Having systems for the things that you do repeatedly. So like for me, I have an onboarding checklist. So every time I have a new client, I pull up the checklist and just make sure I'm doing all of those things, which means like calendaring certain deadlines, creating their checklist, creating their budget, all that stuff. One of the big things, the big systems that I want people to have is tracking their inquiries and their leads. So I want people to know where those inquiries are coming from. I want them to know if they booked something, keep an eye on what package you book and at what price point. If you do book something, like what was the sales meeting or call like? Was it a call? Was it video or was it in person? Because you might find that like regular phone calls, you're terrible. You're great over video. In person, maybe we're trying not to necessarily do that a lot these days. So like, then you would know, okay, I want to push everybody to make sure we're doing a video call and not a regular call, because I'm my best self when I can do video, that kind of thing. So having the processes for just also to like map out what your process looks like for the different components of the wedding. So I have calendar reminders where I'm checking in with a group of clients every 3 weeks. And I did that because I never want my clients to feel like I'm not, like, especially when it's a slow time, I don't want them to think that I'm not paying attention. So I have something that reminds me just to check in. Sometimes there's a lot going on. Sometimes there's not. I've got calendar reminders for when I start on all the logistics, for when I send like guidelines for final payments and gratuity things. When I send them their own copy of their day of timeline and that kind of thing. So having those systems and processes so that you don't have to remember stuff. I'm a big fan of writing it all down and making everything some kind of workflow, because we don't need to remember. We don't need to have to try to remember when to invoice somebody. It should be, if you use a CRM, it should pop up in there. If you just use Google Calendar like I do, it pops up on there to tell me to invoice people. So don't rely on your brain to run your business, have it all written down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree, especially in this day and age where so many tech tools are out there in order to help the process. It's like, just start with one of them to help automate, your business a bit and kind of relieve you of that pressure, especially of remembering all those details.
For sure. Yeah. And also people, it can be easy. I mean, I know people that use tools like Honeybook, Dubsado, Asana, Trello, all those things. Like, I am not a tools person. I get by using Microsoft Word, Excel, and my Google Calendar. And like, that works great for me. So people again need to just do whatever works for them and not feel pressure to have anything like fancy if they don't want it.
Yeah.
But you just need to have something. Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree. Well, what other, I guess, tips do you have when it comes to planners and the emotional side of planning? What do you have any other tips that you would like to share before we wrap up today?
Yeah, so this is sort of like it's kind of work in progress a little bit, but I have kind of this like 3-step process that
let's do it.
Put together for how we can handle stressful and emotionally charged situations. So
I love
step 1 is we kind of just have to like experience whatever it is that's happening. If like we're at an event and something goes wrong and like a client or a parent or somebody is being not particularly nice to us, like we can't just walk away. We have to like sit there, try to take things professionally. Now I'm not advocating for anybody to put up with any kind of like abuse or harassment or anything like that. But, if somebody's like complaining about something, like we just have to sit there and take it nicely. But let's say it's an emotional thing that kind of happened and post-wedding, it's still lingering around. So my step 2 is for us to kind of think through it logically. So figure out what happened, identify, was it something that was our fault? Was it something that had absolutely nothing to do with us, but because we're the planner, we're the ones getting the feedback. So just kind of figure out logically what happened, what went wrong. Was there anything we could have done? If not, just if it was something that was our fault, I'm a big fan of just owning up to it, like take responsibility.
Me too.
And then the third step is to then check in with yourself emotionally and kind of physically and see how you're feeling. Because I find that in step 2, you might say, oh, that was absolutely not my fault. It was somebody who needed to blow off steam. It was another vendor who messed something up, and it was just feedback that was coming to me. And even though your brain says, I had nothing to do with this, your body, I mean, this happens to me a lot. Like my body physically still feels responsible or feels guilty or feels like I've let somebody down.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that we not ignore kind of how our body feels in those moments when our brain might be telling us one thing and we might still, our heart might be telling us something else. So I think it's important. And then ultimately we have to move, like the unofficial 4th step is that ultimately we have to move past it. So like, if it was something that we messed up, take responsibility. If it's not something that we messed up, like acknowledge that we're feeling bad about it. But then eventually you have to let it go.
Yeah, I love that. So I was writing notes too. So take it nicely, think
Yes.
logically, and then check in emotionally. And then after that, move on. Let the
Let it go.
pieces let it go. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I think those are
Yeah.
just excellent tips, especially when you're on site and like you said, you're dealing with just people's pure emotions coming
Oh
at you
yeah.
based off of something that was happening. And really remember that it's probably more about something that they're going through, versus you. So
Yeah.
taking it nicely
Yeah.
kind of helps them get it out so that you
Yeah.
can go and through the rest of the steps. So
Yeah, I had something happen where another vendor, I did every like again, reflecting on it logically, I did everything that I possibly could have. This other vendor just messed up
mm,
tragically. And one of the parents of one of the marriers at the end of the night was just like yelling at me about
yeah,
it. And part, like you just said, it's about something more. And for them, I think part of it was like embarrassment because it was kind of a visible mistake, a very visible mistake on the part of the other vendor. And I think the parents were embarrassed about like, they felt like it reflected bad on them. And so, of course, they yell at me. I take it in the moment. I, do the problem solving and get everything fixed. And then I just cried on the drive
oh
home.
gosh.
But again, like once I had time to reflect on it, it was like that had absolutely nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
I did everything that I could in the moment to remedy the problem. And of course, like on the drive home, I felt terrible about it, but eventually like just had to let it go. So
Yeah. I mean, because and I know we're going like deeper, but it's because it's pure, like it's a pure emotion and there's this energy that's coming at you that you literally are
yeah,
receiving. And I
yeah,
think sometimes it's hard to let it flow right through you so that
yeah,
you can just put your logical hat on.
yeah,
Sometimes we absorb that.
yeah,
And it's really healthy if we can find a really good way to, like you said, reflect on it and really release it.
yeah,
Um, and I think
yeah.
I guess that's what makes us hold on to some of that stress while we're planning. If we can get really good at like, I don't know, changing that up, I feel like
Yeah. We have
people
to
would be in a
process
better
it.
position, but it is
Um, Yeah.
hard.
Well, what something you just said reminded me, I think too, I mean, it's hard. Like as wedding planners, we put so much time and effort and energy and emotion and like we pour ourselves into every single event. And I
Mhm.
know that clients don't ever, they might appreciate us, they might love us, but they will never really understand like how much work. So I feel like in a lot of those situations, when somebody's coming at you like that, or when somebody post wedding isn't happy with something, we
Mhm.
feel like number one, I mean, I've had situations where I kind of felt like betrayed, like the client, like, I'm just like, I just went through all this with you and you're going to complain about this to me. Like that's heartbreaking and really unfair and not very,
Mhm.
not very nice.
Mhm.
But yeah, we put so much into it. And I think that's also why sometimes it's just so hard when we're in those situations where
Mhm.
somebody's not happy or something has gone wrong
Yeah.
because people just don't appreciate like everything that has gone in behind the scenes on our
Yeah.
part.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, there's so much to unpack, but
Yeah.
I do feel like these steps really do help and just appreciate you sharing
Yeah.
today. And, planners, they're not alone in this, especially if you're working with someone that, let's say, might be difficult, have a team, right? That's with you that can help you and support you through this and really I don't know, I'm just an advocate for just being in a team of accountability and check-in and support
Yeah.
to help you get through those
Yeah.
stressful times.
For sure. Don't isolate yourself. I mean, I think one of the things that surprised me most in starting this business was I didn't think that I would make a lot of wedding planner friends, but I have. And
Mm,
some very, very dear friends or fellow wedding planners who you might call my quote competition. But
okay.
you have to be able to just talk about these things because it can be very lonely. And like for anybody who's ever, full disclosure, like multiple occasions had to run into the bathroom, get like after you get yelled at and like have a quick
Yes.
cry and then pull yourself together. Like I've been there. That
Mhm,
happens. There's nothing wrong with that. You were totally
mhm,
normal. Cause again, like this is just a super it's emotionally charged for our clients and it's emotionally charged for us too. So like you're not alone. And I encourage everybody to find just a good community of people who are going, do the same kind of work or going through the same thing that they can talk to. So we don't feel so isolated or alone or like weird for having these reactions.
I agree. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much for just, I don't know, sharing with me. I love just talking about this because every time you talk about it, it just helps, someone else as they're getting through a really trying time. And I think we're really going through some very difficult times right now in the industry. So it really just helps talking about how we deal with all these pieces as it relates to wedding and event planning. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, of course.
So I do have like some really quick questions. They're fun questions. And they're surprising you with a couple of these, but they're not too hard. So let me know when you're ready and we'll just get started.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. So how do you say no to something that you can't handle?
Oh, that's a bad question for me because I'm one of those that like,
you say yes.
I take it on and then I just figure out how to do it. Perfect example is I don't do a lot of corporates. I do maybe like one corporate event a year or something like that. And I had somebody who wanted me to plan like a full-blown retreat and conference, like have it hosted at a hotel, not in New York City. And I don't do destination stuff. And I should have said, this is not in my wheelhouse, but I didn't get the job. It was potentially a lot of money. So I was like, you know what? I can make this work. I have contacts in the cities where they're doing it. So I tried. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to say no. So do as I say, not as I do, and like try to be realistic with your expectations and your capabilities. But
it's hard because sometimes it goes completely opposite of what we're here to do, which is, serve people. So I totally get, I get what you're saying. Yeah. So the next question is, what is your favorite personal development book that you would like to recommend to everyone?
Oh, I'm looking at my book. Yeah, I'm sitting here looking at my bookshelf. So for me, there was a book basically about introverts. It's called Quiet. And as somebody who I recently was told that I'm probably 50% introvert and 50% extrovert, which like blew my mind because I've been living the majority of my life thinking I was an introvert. But it was really kind of a life-changing book because it made me sort of feel less bad about being the quieter person, being like the shyer person. So that like very personal development, that was one of the really important ones. And then I think just kind of for business, there's a book by Danny Meyer called Setting the Table, which is all about hospitality. And hospitality is like one of my personal and company core values. And so I found it was really fascinating to see how he approaches hospitality at his restaurants. Like just going above and beyond was really fascinating.
Perfect. I haven't read that one. I'll have to definitely put that one on my list.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for those. And our last question is, what do you do on Sunday afternoons?
Oh, I'm usually watching TV.
Nothing wrong with a little TV on a Sunday afternoon.
No, yeah. I'm trying because I'm like, if I have to work, I'll usually try to do it in the morning. So that way I'm like relaxing, easing back into Monday morning. I feel like that's left over from like working a 9-to-5 job, was making sure you've got a little downtime on Sunday afternoons. And when it's nice, I just bought a bike over Christmas. So when it's nice out, hopefully I'll be riding my bike on Sunday afternoons.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Yeah. I cannot wait till, we all get a chance to do
warm weather. Sunshine. I know. Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, for anyone that is wanting to find you, why don't you share with everyone how to get a hold of you?
Yes. So my website is colorpopevents.com. I have an email address on there. So I love talking about this stuff. So if there's anybody who wants to kind of chat, has follow-up questions or anything, like, please don't hesitate to reach out and email me. And then I am at ColourPop Events on all the different social media platforms. And then if anybody would like to get a copy of the Wedding Rollercoaster, it is available on Amazon.
Nice. Well, thank you very, very much. I hope everyone just runs out and gets your book so they can learn even more. And I appreciate having you on the podcast. I learned so much and just appreciated the tips that you shared with us today. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. This was a really great conversation.
So what do you think? I told you would enjoy this interview with Leah. It really hits home that many of us can relate in experiencing highly emotional moments during the execution of your event. I would like to just encourage you to go through Leah's process for a calm response next time you're in a situation that may feel tough to handle. With that, thank you so much for joining the Planners on Purpose podcast. Until next time, stay on purpose.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode. If you enjoyed the conversation, hit the like button and tell us how much you enjoyed the show by leaving a message in the comments. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.